Hello and welcome to the Small Business Briefing. I'm Brian Kelly, the CEO of the Small Business Association of Michigan.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Sarah Miller, Vice President of Marketing and Strategic Communications. Thanks for joining us today. And I want to say welcome to one of our new VIP members, the Michigan Academy of Family Physicians located in Okemos. So welcome Carlene Catola, their CEO, and the rest of the Michigan Academy of Family Physicians team. And of course, we're welcoming them on behalf of our sponsor, Consumers Credit Union. You can learn more about them at consumerscu.org. So, Brian, let's talk a little bit about your background, or maybe lack thereof. We've got some big changes happening here at SBAM.
Yeah, so this is likely to be the last small business briefing from what has been the SBAM offices since for the last 15 years. Moving not too far, just across the street, downtown Lansing, across the street to 101 South Washington on the 9th floor. And so we've been kind of packing stuff up and preparing, getting ready for this move for quite some time. The new office will be much more flexible, more open space, hoteling, because we have a very flexible work arrangement with our team. And but it'll be a fresh new space to move forward with that is really tailored around the way that we do business today. But that means that as things are moving out, that you and I, as we sit here in our previous offices, it's kind of looks like a hostage situation, with very nondescript, nothing identifiable on the desks in the background. But that's because we're locked and loaded, ready to move.
Absolutely. I was on the SBAM team when we moved into these offices 15 years ago. So it's exciting to see, what we're doing next. I'm really looking forward to the move and to kind of showcasing it to our members and our briefing audience. All right. So Brian, last week, the IRS announced that it was putting the employee retention credit, like the filings, kind of on pause. So can you talk a little bit about what this means?
Yeah, the IRS commissioner did pause the processing of employee retention credits. And this is something that has really been gaining a lot of steam in recent months, but also has caught the eye of the IRS because there are these, what they call ERC, or employee retention credit mills, organizations that have sprung up just for the purposes of processing these retention credits, and are doing so, the IRS believes, fraudulently or inappropriately. And so there's enough of that activity. They were worried enough about it to where they put it on pause. So you can still file if you qualify, if you're a tax professional, or if you're one of the SBAM endorsed partners has indicated that you do qualify for it. You can still file, but they will not be settling any of these filings until they figure out how to sort out those that they believe are fraudulent from those that are legitimate. This is a very, very generous tax credit, and it applies in a couple of different situations. You can look at your sales quarter by quarter in 2020 or 2021, and if they went down in individual quarters, you could qualify for up to $26,000 per employee that you retained during those time periods. But also, if your operations were reduced or shut down because of COVID orders during those areas and you didn't lay people off, or the employees that you didn't lay off, you may qualify, even if your sales didn't go down, you may still qualify for the employee retention credit. And so it's a very, very generous tax credit. Unfortunately, it appears as though it has attracted some bad actors, and those bad actors were plentiful enough to where the IRS decided to put this pause at least through the end of the year, so December 31st. My sense is that the IRS commissioner making this decision has decided that they just need new systems in place to decipher between legitimate and fraudulent claims, and then they will resume paying the credits, at least the credits that they believe are legitimate. So should probably expect that the scrutiny around these credit filings will be increased, but it's in current law, so they can't just cancel them. The IRS can't just not process these returns. They will have to do so Now, just a little bit more background on it too. You might look at it and maybe you've heard something about it, or actually you probably get, if you own a business, you're probably getting spammed on a lot of different providers saying, hey, you could qualify for an employee retention credit. So in the instance that you receive, or the instance, in the instance that you received a paycheck protection program forgiven loan back during the height of the pandemic, that in the beginning, that precluded you from qualifying for the employee retention credit. You had to pick one or the other. That is no longer the case. The Congress changed the law. And so there are a lot of businesses that didn't realize they applied for the employee retention credit that later on did. So I'm not surprised that there's a lot of volume here in these credits that are being filed and with the IRS, but still they believe, and I think that there's really something to it. They do believe that there's a lot of fraud going on. If you look at other pandemic era programs like the enhanced unemployment, you saw billions and billions of dollars in fraud. And even though most people who utilized that tool did so legally and appropriately, and so there's huge claims made for those that are legit. You put the fraud on top of it, the experience with unemployment, the embarrassment that the government faced, you can really understand or see why the IRS wouldn't want a piece of that unemployment embarrassment that occurred before. And so therefore tapping on the brakes, get some new control systems in place before presumably resuming the processing of returns as early as perhaps January.
All right, thanks for the update there. Let's talk about the state's unemployment rate, which did edge up a little bit this month, but maybe that's not necessarily a bad news. So tell us more.
Yeah, so just went up about 0.1%, so 3.6 to 3.7%. It had not gone up since October of last year, so it's been a real streak of either holding steady or going down. But really, it wasn't for a bad reason that the unemployment rate went up. It went up because people got into the workforce. So people that had been on the sidelines got back into the workforce. It went up. The labor force grew by about 25,000 people. And so that really explains the entire increase in the unemployment rate. So that's why when people look at the rate, it goes up or down, and we're programmed to think down is good, up is bad. In this case, it went up, but it went up for a good reason. That is because people that had been on the sidelines are back in the workforce. So looking at the seasonally adjusted payroll jobs, basically level throughout the summer. It was a little bit down, and then it was up about the same amount, kind of closing out the summer with our total employment in Michigan about the same as we entered into the summer.
Thanks, Brian. SBAM had its fall survey in the field last week, and we're working to have our complete report and press release out in the next couple of days, but we wanted to share a little peek into the results. So first up, we asked small business owners their thoughts about the paid leave and unemployment policy proposals that are out. What did they say?
So if you follow SBAM's policy work and our advocacy work within the legislative process, you'll know at the state level, there have been a plethora of issues that we've been concerned about, things that would harm the business environment here in Michigan, make it more expensive or difficult to operate a small business. We asked about a few of those issues here in this particular survey. The first being the governor's proposal to add a mandatory 15-week paid leave benefit, kind of modeled after the reasons in the Family Medical Leave Act at the federal level, a little more expansive than at the federal level, but also being as much as 15 weeks. And that was the first proposal that we asked about. There would be a payroll tax that would be partially paid by the employer, partially paid by the employee. And we asked small business owners whether or not they support that. It was about 10-1 against. Again, not surprising except for the margin, I suppose. So there were 81% were opposed, 8% in favor of such a proposal, and then 11% undecided. So so very, very strong opposition, given the overall difficulties in finding enough help and the workforce in terms of keeping up fully staffed and reliability of the workforce, the things that we've been hearing about over the last several years, I'm sure plays into the strong opposition. We also asked whether or not that proposal would be detrimental to your business, and the options were extremely detrimental, somewhat detrimental, or not at all detrimental. And 70% said it would be extremely detrimental to their business, and 10% said somewhat detrimental, and 20% said somewhat, and that last 10% said not at all. And then we asked about the unemployment proposal. So the idea of extending unemployment, today you can get up to 20 weeks of unemployment, and there's a proposal to expand that out to 26 weeks. And so basically we gave the options of yes, you support that, or no, you don't support it. And we also asked, or we gave an option of no, you don't support it, but you would if there was really accountability in the system, if there was real accountability in the unemployment system. You might feel differently. But then it was basically 10% supported expanding unemployment duration from 20 to 26 weeks. And the combined no, either absolutely no or no, but I might feel differently if there was accountability changes, were 80%, and then 81%, and then 9% undecided. We also asked about increasing unemployment benefits, so the weekly benefit. It's been in Michigan, it's been the same for a while. There's a lot of talk about the idea of increasing it, looking to some of our neighbors and increasing it to a level that is as high as other states like, say, Minnesota. And there were 14% of people said, yes, that sounds like a good idea. 47% said no. 30% said no, but I would feel differently if I were more confident the unemployment system had real accountability built into it. So the no answers were 77, so 14 to 77, and the last 9% undecided. So pretty strong opposition to these changes, which again, not a surprise, but we do intend to carry this message into the legislative process, to share it with policymakers, just as we publish it more broadly, to make sure that they understand that small business owners provide most of the employment in most communities across our state. We really do need to take heed, listen when they're telling us that these things would be a problem.
And then we also asked our survey participants about existing leave policies. This kind of helps us get a sense for what current practices are among our members and other small business owners. So what did that look like? Yeah, so we wanted to also ask our members, if they offer paid time off today, and if so, what, how much did they offer, and then different types of paid time off as well. So the first thing we asked was just kind of in terms of total leave, except for short-term disability insurance policies. What type of benefit do you offer? About 23% didn't offer the benefit, 21% 1 to 2 weeks, 33%, which was the biggest category, 3 to 4 weeks, 17 5 to 6, and 6% over 6 weeks. So no kind of main answer there. 3 to 4 weeks of vacation sick time was the largest at 33%. The vast majority, of course, businesses provide some level of paid time off. We asked about short-term disability insurance. So this would be 6 weeks, somebody has a surgery or something like that, a percentage would be covered. And 14% offered that to some employees, 24% offered it to all employees, and 62% did not offer that
as a benefit. So a wide variety of practices in terms of paid time off, and that's kind of the environment in which these proposals are being made.
We also asked about the main issues that are impacting small businesses, and we gave some choices, and kind of talked about, how much of a problem things might be. So let's talk about those responses.
Yeah, the ones that were considered, let's talk about the ones that were listed by small business owners. But we had almost 500 responses, I think 489 responses. That's so this is a significant response rate to this survey. The things that were listed as major problems today: inflation. Inflation actually was the biggest one. Availability of labor and quality of labor were numbers 2 and 3. And then other major problems that were listed by small business owners, not quite at over 50%. Taxes at 46% said it's a major problem, and regulations 43% major problem. And then and one of the options being new business and sales trends, and only 23% said there was a major problem, but 42% said it was somewhat of a problem, which it'd been a little while since we asked this question this way, but sales and sales trends actually had not been in previous times when we've asked about that, had not been identified as even somewhat of a problem for a while. So that one did catch my attention a little bit as maybe an indication that things were softening a bit. We also asked what areas should state government prioritize in terms of what, and so the ones that should be a major priority. The top 2 items for major priority were lowering taxes, and then also improving the educational system. We were asking about the K-12 system. There were some of the others, just looking at the ones that got over 50%, reducing regulations, and then right at 50%, expanding the workforce. So again, not really big surprises in the answers. There's a lot more to our survey as well. If you're a member of SBAM, you'll get our release full survey results. I don't know, maybe as soon as tomorrow or the next day. We will publish them, and I do expect we'll get a fair amount of media coverage on the survey, given that we asked about some pretty timely topics, and given the lopsidedness of the results in terms of current policy proposals, I think it'll get some attention.
All right, yes, stay tuned for that release. Brian, we spoke last Thursday. We knew UAW strike was, on the horizon for midnight that evening. So give us the update. What's the latest?
So as I'm sure everybody has heard, as I had mentioned, there wasn't much chance of a deal being struck. It looked to me like the union was looking to strike, then negotiate. And that is kind of how it has played out. But the negotiations are going slow. But they are, I think, really for the first time, negotiations are actually happening now. So remember, the unions asked for, or the UAW, from 3 automakers that they're negotiating with, they asked for 40% pay increases. But when you consider the compounding impact of those pay increases, it worked out to be a 46% increase over the life of the contract, whereas the automakers started in the 10 to 12 range. And the reason that I say that I don't think that there was really a negotiation ahead of the call for these limited strikes was because the automakers themselves, the companies, Ford, General Motors, Stellantis, had been making offers, and then I'll say counter offers, and had almost doubled what their offer was. So over 20% was on the table when they went to a strike, but they were basically negotiating with themselves. The union wasn't really budging on their number, and they went to strike with 20+% increases on the table from the automakers. Now, since then, there is a what has happened is the automakers have come up more, and last I had seen reported, I think it was 23 or 24%. The nominal rate that the unions finally, that's an indication that they are actually negotiating at this point, came down at least 36% from 40. So pretty big, still a pretty big difference between the two. And it's kind of a risky time for the automakers because they're already had about 10% higher labor costs than their competitors. And the union president, Mr. Fain, had indicated that the auto workers were working on starvation. His word, starvation wages. But it is $65 an hour is what their package comes out to before this negotiation. It's about, and then on top of that, there's profit sharing, which was $12,000 last year from General Motors, and then actually 14,000 apparently from Stellantis. So there's a lot of rhetoric that's still floating around, but for the first time in this entire process, it does look like that the negotiation has actually started, at least on both sides of the equation. It's not just the automakers negotiating with themselves. If the unions are at the table.
Now we know this is going to have some ripple effects and impacts, but tell us how it impacts the unemployment trust fund.
Yeah, it's an area that I'm really kind of concerned about is the health of the trust fund. You might say, well, if somebody strikes, they don't qualify for unemployment. But this isn't just a normal strike. These are surprise and targeted strikes that are meant to shut down the automakers without broad strikes. So what happens if they strike in key areas, it shuts down the production line, which means that the automakers have to lay off people in different plants. So for example, General Motors has had to lay off, not in Michigan, but in Kansas, had to lay off a couple thousand employees because of a strike at a different plant. And that, so those employees go on the unemployment system. Here in Michigan, Ford had to lay off so far about 600 employees at a plant that is not striking, and but is because there was a strike, it led to these layoffs. The more of that happens, the longer the strike goes on, the more kind of ripple impact layoffs the automakers will have to make, and the more strain and claims that will be made against the unemployment system. Our unemployment insurance trust fund, which before the pandemic was over $5 billion, got depleted basically down to zero during the pandemic because the unemployment trust fund was used kind of as a social safety net instead of an insurance policy. And now it has built up over $1 billion in that fund, but still way, way less than it needs to be. And it really can't handle a big influx of claimants. But unfortunately, if this strike drags on for months and months, which there's some talk that it could, then the idea of regular and substantial reliance on the trust fund, on the unemployment trust fund, is something that could have an impact on the health and solvency of the fund that's already under strain because of the pandemic, and could result in higher costs to all businesses that are required as a condition of employing people to pay into the fund.
All right, Brian, it's time for Data Monday.
All right, let's run through some surveys, pretty interesting surveys that have been out this last week that I wanted to share with you. The New York Fed here has their household surveys, which indicate and it's individuals like self-describing how they feel their financial situation is compared to a year ago. And as you'll see here, the number of people that are describing their financial situation as much worse off versus a year ago has started to go back up. And it's, historically speaking, is quite high right now. at over 10%. Not as high as it was at the end of 2022, but really quite high. Those who say that's much better off is, well, pretty low. Only about 3% of households say that they're in a much better off situation compared to a year ago. Again, this is the New York Fed's survey. The also part of that survey, the number of individuals saying that it is either somewhat harder, that's in yellow, or much harder in blue to obtain credit versus a year ago, both of those up. And we've talked a lot about the financial industry and the desire of them to increase their liquidity and improve their capital positions. One of the things that a lot of banks have had to do is to be a little more conservative with respect to their lending practices, pull back on lending, and clearly it is showing up in these surveys. And then consumer expectations, just asking consumers, not that consumers are experts on inflation, but what do they expect to happen? And this is an area where they expect improvement in the future. That the blue line shows expectations a year ahead in terms of inflation rates, and then the yellow line is 3 years ahead on inflation rates. So actually, these look pretty reasonable to me. These look like consumers' expectations are pretty close to what would seem realistic given the actions that have been taken to tame inflation and the type of trends that we see happening. And the National Federation of Independent Businesses, their monthly survey, they ask about these 4 issues in terms of of these 4 issues, what's the single biggest problem? And quality of labor had been the top, and then inflation took over. As inflation has come down, quality of labor now in this survey, just you can barely tell, but in the survey that quality of labor is now the #1 most important problem that's facing facing small businesses according to this survey. Now looking at the optimism rate for small businesses, it's asked in a couple of different ways. So think of the blue line as being how optimistic are you about your business? And this is not a percentage, it's an index that takes a lot of things into consideration. And then also small business asked about the outlook for the business conditions that they'll be operating in. Both are at historically low positions. The optimism index as a business kind of reflecting on their own situation is not quite as low as it was during the Great Recession, but it's low compared to the modern times. If you look back, especially going back, say, the last 6 or 7 years. I thought this was a kind of an interesting chart that Bridge Michigan or infographic that Bridge Michigan put out. We talked in the beginning of this of our show here today about the unemployment rate and how labor force participation had increased. But take a look at there are still 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 counties that have a labor force participation rate at below 40%, and that's part of that is age and demographics. These are very, very rural areas as well. So you've got Ontonagon up here in the Upper Peninsula, and then these counties here, Montmorency and Oscoda County, and then Roscommon, and over here Lake, like where Baldwin is. So very low labor force participation in those very rural areas. And then the areas that are over 60%, probably not much of a surprise, is basically this I-96 corridor. Look at that, how consistent that is across the state. So you've got, places like Allegan and Kent and Ottawa counties, which have some of the highest employment rates in the state. So it's just a lot of demand for people in there. But just looking right across the state in that corridor, it's really kind of impressive. And then the only one in northern Michigan here, a couple, I guess, in northern Michigan, you've got Traverse City or Grand Traverse County. And actually, I meant to look up this other one that looks like, Osceola County being the other one over 60. And then initial and ongoing jobless claims, you'll see that initial jobless claims actually fell last month, and then ongoing stayed about the same. And then the final one that we're going to look at today, if you look at the monthly retail sales increases, everything looks pretty steady. In terms of overall 0.6% increase. So, nothing impressive there. Look at the biggest one by far is gasoline. That's because gasoline prices have gone up. And I'm sure everybody watching this broadcast has noticed and experienced that a pretty big jump. It's one of the reasons why I expect that inflation, top line inflation numbers will, here as we look at them in a month or two, are going to show that that the CPI rose, but it won't be that core inflation. It'll mainly be driven by gas price. Pretty big increase in a short period of time. Showed up in the retail sales. Everything else in the retail sales report pretty flat, pretty frankly boring.
All right. I just want to let everyone know we will be in Ann Arbor this Thursday for our owner-to-owner peer networking event. Reminder, these events are for business owners only. So if you're in the Ann Arbor area, definitely join us. You can learn more on our website. Otherwise, have a great week, and we will be back here Thursday at 3 p.m. See you then.
See you on Thursday, everybody.